Good evening and welcome to Hello It's Us, a program based on the premise that life in general goes better if it's you, me, and them working together as opposed to you, me, and them working across purposes. Hello It's Us is brought to you by a collaboration between the Center for Disabilities and Development, the Extended Dream Foundation, and all the folks here at Public Access Television Channel 18. I'm thrilled to do what's one of our favorite shows here with part of our local legislators. The session starts next Monday, so we're here to get some of their thoughts. We've got Senator Joe Bolkcom, Representative Bobby Kaufmann, and Representative Sally Stutsman. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
What are this year's hot button issues? Anybody can jump in.
Well, let me go
answer.
ahead and start. First, Happy New Year, Terry. Thanks for having us
Thank you.
on. It's a pleasure to be back on your program. We're in the second year of our 2-year legislative session, if you will, and we had a very busy year in 2013 with passage of some education reform, property tax reform, and our health care reform. So I think people are coming back in 2014 as we get together on January 13th for the first time to essentially go in and do a budget. The state's in relatively good financial position. There's probably some interest to do some more in the area of education funding, make sure our local schools have enough resources. It's hard to predict what might be a hot issue, so to speak, as your question asks. But I think there are 150 members. There'll be a whole bunch of bills filed, and there'll be some interest in things like the gas tax and school funding. We're going to be implementing this health care bill that we passed last year, trying to get about 150,000 Iowans signed up to have health care. That we'll be doing. The mental health system, we continue to work on that. It's hard, we have an election in 2014, so I suspect the leaders certainly have said this throughout the fall. We're going to try and get done early and get people back home on the campaign trail and back working on next fall's election. So we've got the governors on the ballot, and we have a U.S. Senate race, and so I think we'll try and get our work done and get done. But that said, there's work to do, and I think people will go to Des Moines ready to do it.
I would echo the Senator's sentiments that last year was a pretty voluminous year, and that a lot of what we'll be doing this year will be making sure that the unintended consequences of any of those bills are fixed. But I personally see this as a year that's ripe for some of the behind-the-scenes legislation that don't get the headlines. Things that are equally important as property tax relief and Medicaid expansion, but that don't get the big headlines. And I refer specifically to like our EMS officials. I was on the EMS interim study committee, and just figuring out how to, as a state, best help these folks who are dedicating their time. And also an issue that's passionate to me. I just filed a bill yesterday to update Iowa's elder abuse code. Iowa is one of a few states that has a very weak elder abuse law, and I'd like to see us do more to protect our population, which Iowa's got a large base of seniors, and I'd like to make sure that they're still protected.
And I would like to see us move on elder abuse and get something in place. Everybody talks about a short session. I guess I'll see it, believe it when I see it. It seems like there's always something that pops up that has to have our undivided attention. But I think we had lots of legislation last year. I think there might be some minor adjustments we'll have to make with some things, as we get into the implementation. Interestingly enough, I talked to somebody within the school systems, and they talked about all the reforms that were done, and they said, just kind of let the dust settle now, and let's implement these things before we make any other changes. So I think that's probably pretty good advice, for a lot of these things that have some pretty dramatic changes for Iowa citizens.
Those all certainly sound like good things. I would also hope that there's a lot of attention paid to the whole MHDS redesign, most specifically to the waiting lists. And I know y'all approved money for that last year, and the governor vetoed it, and I just really don't see the sense in that, and certainly hope that happens again, because people are going to end up in institutions by the droves if that option doesn't become available.
I was disappointed with the veto. I didn't expect it, and I certainly didn't agree with it. And it would certainly be a top priority of mine. My district is very important, along with everybody else's, that we allocate those funds and that we make sure that the redesign has its intended consequences. So from this Republican, you can count me in on the mental health push for more funds and better access for folks.
Well, I can certainly assure all of you that would be one of the bills in particular that we could probably very easily garner lots of support, lots of emails, calls, visits.
And that was a bipartisan effort by the legislature, to approve that. And so it was very disappointing when the governor vetoed that. So I hope that we can send the message to him again that these dollars are important to the system to maintain the services and go from there. One other thing too, Terry, that I wanted to mention is the closing of Toledo. And I have some real concerns about that and how it was done. And I think that we need to have some answers as to, what is the future for those girls that were at Toledo and for the facility too. And I've not heard anything like that. So I hope that we can get some answers to that. And, I would love to revisit that decision by the governor of, whether that was in really the best interest of the girls that were living there.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And I mean, it didn't make sense if you're going to appoint a committee of experts to give you recommendations and you do exactly the opposite of what their recommendations are. I have to wonder how open-minded the governor was to the recommendations, or if that had already been decided. And that just seems so foolish, and the swiftness with which it happened absolutely amazes me, and makes me wonder whether part of that process wasn't already in effect, because I find it amazing that they could have placed that many kids that quickly. And the stories in the paper have said that a lot of them are back with providers that they had been with before. Well, if the provider is good enough for them to be there now, why weren't they there already?
Mm-hmm.
And
in some cases they probably were, and those providers said we can't handle these, because a lot of these children have some real significant issues. Sure. And they're not easy to handle. And Toledo kind of was always known as the last resort, when nobody else could take care of the kids in a private agency setting. They were referred to Toledo. So I have questions about that too. How can we be expecting these providers to provide the care when they couldn't do it before? So.
Yeah, I think it'll be a conversation next week when we go back. More than a conversation, I know there are members that have actually filed a lawsuit challenging the governor's ability to do that. I mean, the legislature appropriated money to Toledo. We expected Toledo to continue to be in operation, and he kind of unilaterally has made this decision to close it, which is really a horrible decision for the kids. And however, if we are going to close it, there ought to be a plan. It shouldn't just be in the middle of the night we're closing it. There ought to be a plan, and frankly, an investment in providers to be able to handle the level of acuity some of these youngsters. The challenges they have are high. They need nearly 24-hour one-on-one supervision in some cases. That's expensive, and there's been no real plan towards developing more community-based services. If it's not Toledo, And I think that conversation's going to start here once we go back next week.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what makes these folks qualified or willing to do it now if they couldn't do it before.
Right, right.
You know, that just, and, you know, I haven't heard or read anything about what happens to the employees. I mean, does
to be
some kind of a
unemployed.
bumping system go into place? Or are they just all gone? What?
Yeah, I suspect some of that, but there are probably people going to be filing for unemployment in some cases, I would gather. So yeah, I mean, it's not a very, it wasn't a very planful approach to solving whatever problem he thought was there.
You know, what's going to happen to the facility?
Another good question.
Yep.
You know?
We have a shortage of beds right now for kids.
Right.
And so it's kind of like we have a shortage of bed for places for kids that are in significant need, and here we go closing the very beds we need more of. So it'd be good to have a governor that made decisions based on what's good for the kids across a whole host of policy areas. This governor, it seems to be an afterthought for him.
Hopefully things change.
Yeah, one of the, I want to back up a little bit just to the kind of the broader agenda for the session. You asked what the hot button issues are. It remains to be seen what those are, but there will be an agenda coming out of our Senate caucus that's going to focus on the issues of making sure families and individuals are economically more secure. We have a growing inequity in how the benefits of the economy are shared. If the reason we have an economy is to make sure people can make a living and take care of their families and be in the middle class in this country, and increasingly it's harder and harder for Iowa families to make ends meet. And so one of the issues, there are a host of issues in the area of economic security. One is a proposal to raise the minimum wage. Senator Courtney is going to be filing a bill to raise it to $10.10, an attempt to put more money in people's household budgets. There's also going to be a proposal to expand universal or preschool to every Iowa 4-year-old. We have a program in place. It doesn't cover everybody. It's a short, limited day. We know that kids are going to do better if they're ready for kindergarten with a really quality preschool opportunity at age 4. And there's a lot of support for that, so we'll be working on that. And then in the area of taxes, we have a pretty unfair system right now to middle-class Iowans and working Iowans, where they pay a higher percentage of their incomes in taxes than more wealthy Iowans. And there's going to be a proposal to create a middle-class tax cut, basically getting rid of federal deductibility and using the savings to lower the rates for especially those people under, say, $150,000 annual income. And I think those three things, there's a number of other ideas in terms of making sure we get a second-year tuition freeze at our public universities and fund that, as well as making sure our K-12 schools get the boost they need to maintain the local system all over the state. So some education funding issues as well. And we did another major piece of legislation in 2013 dealing with workforce development, investments in our community colleges, investments in helping people in the workforce. More than 300,000 Iowans in the workforce that don't have their GEDs. For the first time, we invested in that. We need a skilled, trained workforce to boost incomes, and that'll be a priority as well this coming year to continue to work in that area. So all of that combined is really focused on kind of an economic agenda to expand and support our middle class here in Iowa.
And the Democratic and the caucus in the House also has very, very similar items that they're interested in. And the focus is in improving the lot of the middle class.
Well, it's hard. Senator listed a lot of things. I'm trying to keep track of them in my head. He's always an ambitious person. I like that about him. And I'm always happy to point out the areas that we do agree. And with what he just said, certainly the historic tuition freeze last year was a great thing for our students, and it's something I know we're going to look at again this year. While I definitely do not support removing federal deductibility, I do share the concerns for a middle class tax cut as opposed to an upper earners tax cut. I folks that are making large salaries don't need an income tax cut. Middle class families do. And then one area that we definitely do disagree on is I do not support a raise of the minimum wage. I'm more focused on providing people with opportunities in education to get better paying jobs. And I have a severe concern that employers that would hire kids that are in high school and just out of college are going to hesitate to pay them that $10.10. And so while some families may see an increase in income, we also could see a larger unemployment rate, in my opinion, for those kids that have those minimum wage jobs right now. But any proposal that is come across, I always give it due diligence, and I'm not shutting the door to anything personally before we get into session.
Well, whether it's raising minimum wage or however it happens, my big concern is with home health agencies who have gone without rate increases for way too many years, and we've lost a number of them. And I find it hard to rationalize why nursing homes merrily roll along with increases every year, and I think actually it's twice a year. Yet the home health agencies don't get that. And unfortunately, the folks who work for home health agencies are barely above minimum wage, typically don't get 40 hours a week specifically so that they don't also get benefits. And I'm not sure what can happen to change that. I know that the Direct Care Workers Task Force has kind of been working on that for a few years, but it seems to me like they're just really spinning their wheels, and that they've got their focus in the wrong place and can't seem to decide what the qualifications for those folks should be, because right now there's none. You don't have to have 1 minute of training of any kind to have one of those positions. Essentially, so long as you're breathing, you'll get hired. And I've had some of those folks, and let me tell you, I never wished for people to stop breathing so quickly in my life. How can that be changed?
Well,
How can
there are a couple
task force be
issues. A couple issues you've raised. One is the reimbursement rate to home providers and the like versus nursing homes. Nursing homes are obviously well organized. We've got them all over the state. They're a huge employer. They have they have a case to make, right? I mean, they have wages to pay and food to buy and utilities to buy, and they get some cost of living, and they've done better with the legislature over time, meeting their ongoing needs for more resources. And so that is true. The home providers, generally speaking, have not done as well. They're not quite as organized, and they don't have as big a presence at the Capitol. However, in the last year or two, we have done some provider increases to home care providers. The issue of workforce and around direct care providers and their desire to basically have a licensing act, if you will, to try and professionalize the services that home providers and direct caregivers provide, I think is a really good idea. Increasingly, we're going to need more people in that field. One way you keep them in that field is make it more of a profession, and of course, make it a job that you can make a living at, which we know now people are challenged. Many of the people that are going to get health care under our Affordable Health Care Act and the work we've done in the legislature are people that happen to work full-time as direct care workers for employers that don't provide health care to them. So their job providing health care to people, they're people that are simply uncovered themselves, which is really kind of a problem. So I think that conversation is going to continue around the notion of creating this licensing act or this professionalization of the home care workers and the direct care workers, which I think is a good one. There are issues, the people that hire folks, they're nervous about it and the cost of it and as an employer, employers want to try and pay people what they can get away with, generalizing here, what they can, what the market will bear. And in the case of home care people, it's something more than minimum wage, but not a heck of a lot more, as you point out. So a lot of this is public program stuff, which relies on the legislature, frankly, to make the kinds of appropriations and the rate increases so that nonprofit agencies, in particular, who rely on a state or federal grant, and some private pay, can have the resources they need. They can't obviously raise people's salaries if they don't have the budget to do it. And that's probably a concern for people as we talk about raising the minimum wage. It'll be a concern for some of those employers, both for-profit and nonprofit, about that issue. But I would say the Iowa Policy Project has done a report around the state of Iowa, looked at every county in the state and said, what does it cost to live in this county for basic rent, groceries, heat, telephone, none of the frills, not going out to movies every night or going out to dinner or going on extravagant vacations. But they say on average it costs about $15 an hour as a wage earner to support yourself. And there's a whole lot of jobs in Iowa that don't pay $15 an hour. And not just jobs that kids work at, jobs that adults work at full-time, and multiple jobs that people have to have in order to make ends meet. So 1010's, it's a boost from 725. It'd probably be something that'll be done over a couple years. But this inequality in income between the people that have the resources and those that don't is bad for our democracy. It's bad for kids. Bad for businesses that rely on customers with money in their pockets. We have to find a way to boost incomes in this state, and one of those ways is to make sure the minimum wage is boosted.
Well, and I think there's certainly a rationale in that, and in increasing reimbursement rates and that thing. It just baffles me how we can have a minimum wage at a level that somebody working 40 hours a week still qualifies for public assistance.
Sure.
Or even up to the $10, $12 an hour if you're still $3 short. There's got to be something done.
Well, the other thing that's, I think, happened over the last 30 years is the decline of organized labor, the labor unions. And it's not to say every workplace needs to be organized, but when you have places that have organized labor unions at workplaces, they tend to have better salaries, they tend to have better benefits, they tend to have better pensions, they tend to raise the ships of other employers that exist in the same communities when they compete for labor. And I know Americans and people they're a little growly about unions, but if you look at the decline in people's incomes and the stagnation of people's incomes, there's a direct relationship between the decline of our labor unions in this country and people's stagnating wages and stagnating quality of life and the like, and the decline of the American middle class. So it would be helpful if we had laws in place, and in a bunch of places we're taking away the ability of people to collectively bargain. But, and again, not every workplace needs to have a union, but it really helps when a few places do. A few years ago you had companies like John Deere, UAW, some of the best jobs in the country, good paying jobs, $22, $23, $24 an hour. When they negotiated a new contract a few years ago, they said everybody that's going to be hired in the future is going to be hired at a different wage, whether it's $12 or $15 an hour rather than $25 an hour. And you pick up the paper any time in the last 3 years after this contract, Deere & Company has had about 19 consecutive quarters of record profits. They've made more money in the last 2 years than they've made before, in any, year over year. They're making money like it's going out of, they're doing quite well, okay? Mm-hmm. At the same time, they're having this conversation with their workers, their new workers, we just can't afford to pay you, okay? And I just think, looking back at that, you thought at the time, UAW, they should make concessions, they're making too much money. The workers, well, here we are today, And you don't hear a conversation about reopening that contract to say share a little bit of the wealth with the people that are making the wealth, and that's the people building the tractors and the combines and the planters and the plows and all that stuff, right? So we've got to be, I think, encouraging more people to get organized in workplaces if we're going to continue to work on this inequity and in the concentration of wealth in this country, which at the end of the day is bad for the democracy. It is bad for our country and the way we govern this country, to have a lot of people that go to work every day and still unable to take care of themselves or their families.
One thing I'd like to point out is that if $7.25 wasn't a good enough minimum wage now, well, the President and Democratic Senate and House had full control up until 2010 and didn't see fit to raise it then when they had the unilateral opportunity. And I guess I just don't like to focus on people's desire to be at the minimum wage. I'd like to focus, I believe in people, and there are certain folks that for whatever reason are not able to work, but for those that are able-bodied, I just believe in people and believe that we need to give them tools to find better paying jobs instead of continually lowering the floor. I think people can do better, and I believe I've read that study too. I think $15 an hour, correct me if I'm wrong, was what it takes one person to care for his or herself and a child. And so when you have the whole family, the family working 2 jobs, it makes it a little bit more equitable. But I just think that people can aspire to be more and do more and can do these jobs that are doing really good paying, such as John Deere.
Well, we've burned through our first 27 minutes here.
Wow.
Doesn't even seem like it.
We have way more
How often
to talk about.
how often is your show on, Terry? Is this on once a week?
Yeah.
We're taping like a couple editions. Okay.
Yep. So, thank you all for being here. Thanks out there. Tune in again.